Welcome back to the Road to City Hall. I'm joined again by the three members of our special panel to discuss former FBI Director James Comey's Senate testimony. Claire Malone is here, along with Brian Lehrer and Michael Waldman. So much of this is so vivid, right? Just the writing by James Comey, the way he describes all of this. He's got a strategic motive, for sure, in talking about how everybody else was shooed out of the room, and then here he is alone with the president, and another time they're having dinner, and they're sort of sitting alone in this room, and I envisioned a gigantic room with, 14-foot ceilings and a spotlight in the middle of the room. You've actually been in the White House for quite a bit. It's not quite like that, is it?
It depends on which room, of course, but there are rooms in the residence where people are brought in to have dinner, where it's like you're having dinner in Buckingham Palace, and if it was just a somewhat dark room with oil portraits glaring down. The whole time I did think about, sort of movies from the 1970s and the culture clash there, because so much of what Trump was portrayed as saying had this kind of heavy inferences, like in The Godfather, the sort of loyalty, the kind of silences, omerta. Yeah. And Comey, this is not the first time a senior FBI official leaked to the Washington Post because he thought the president was trying to cover up. If we now know that those scenes in the parking lot were actually the #2 guy in All the President's Men at the FBI. I mean, it's a real different worldviews that go back a long ways.
But well, yeah, it is very interesting. I was surprised, Brian. I don't think I've ever heard somebody give up a source and describe a leak as openly as he did. To me, it gave him enormous credibility that he basically threw one of his friends over the side and said, I gave it to my buddy who's a professor at Columbia.
And that name came out later. I'm still scratching my head over that one, to be perfectly honest. Why did he reveal that he leaked? And I don't know if leak is the right word, if something has to be classified information in order for it to be a leak when it's shared with the press. But he did anonymously, by doing it through his friend, get those memos out that documented what troubled him about his contacts with Trump. But I'm still trying to figure out why he did it that way and why he disclosed today that he did it that way.
Well, again, I thought the disclosure just gave him enormous credibility because he's going to have to buy that guy a couple of extra beers the next time he sees him.
I guess, but sure. But the Republicans are using this against him big time as, hey, James Comey is a leaker for all he professes to be against leaks as the FBI director, so you can't trust this guy.
Well, they stated that, and in some ways, Claire, they overstated it, right? I mean, the president's personal attorney, Mr. Kasowitz, came forward and said James Comey is one of these people who has illegally leaked privileged, communications. And I'm thinking, you got to name the privilege. You don't just get to say, hey, there's some privileged communication.
Well, they weren't privileged communications because the president already disclosed them to the public. So
well, that cancels the privilege.
But I do think that there is a certain line that Trump and his attorneys are sort of catching on, which is people don't like leakers right now. They feel very frightened about national security issues, and so if you label someone a leaker, that's not a good thing. I think Comey's he had this sort of odd month-long interregnum where he was not in public life, still sort of waiting to have things out in the public with this hearing, which was scheduled, I think, 3 weeks ago. So he's had a long time to get his ducks in a row. And he sort of said, he basically said, this is radical transparency, basically. He said, I decided to leak to my friend because I wanted a special prosecutor. And he got it, by the way. And since then, he's kind of dumped all the info on Robert Mueller, and now he feels like he can say whatever it was that was going on during that month-long period.
I think from everything Comey said, everything I've heard, he was really alarmed, and a lot of the people at the FBI were really alarmed that this was an assault on the rule of law, that there was a cover-up going on, the most egregious part of which was him getting fired, and then Trump attacking him in tweets. And it looked at that moment like he was going to get away with it, like there might not have been an investigation before the appointment of Mueller and before what has happened since. And so, putting ourselves all the way back in the long ago mindset of 3 weeks ago, I think that this was something where Mueller really thought he had to play it as hard as he could.
Well, it's interesting. You're exactly right. I think he changed the facts around a little bit, and we might not have known what the heck was going on if there was a little bit more restraint on the part of the president and some of the people around him. Let me ask you about your former boss, whose name came up in today's testimony, where Bill Clinton's tarmac encounter with then Attorney General Loretta Lynch seems to have really made an impact on him. I didn't realize being FBI director would present so many sort of dilemmas or questions. It really seems that they felt like they couldn't trust her, and he even got that little dig in on her about ordering him to call it a matter rather than an investigation. And of course, they gave it to the media, and we all called it an investigation.
You know, it was what he said was that the Bill Clinton meeting on the tarmac with Loretta Lynch was really a big part of why he felt he had to go his own way, make the decision and make the announcement and the explanation in July of why he didn't bring charges. And, you know, I think a lot of people back then, and I remember, I thought that it was a close call as to whether he should have explained it, and it was a bit understandable. Much harder to explain was what he did in October when he announced that they'd reopened the investigation, and then it turned out they really hadn't, or there was nothing there. I think a lot of people, looking at what Comey did in July, think he had a tough decision and may have done it wrong, but it's more understandable. And I think he gave himself, again, I thought, more credibility by showing that he'd made some tough decisions that the Democrats, as we all know, were not happy with.
Although I wonder if this is going to come back to bite his credibility. I've been looking all day online to see if Loretta Lynch has reacted yet. And when she does react, is she going to dispute his version of events? You know, it's a pretty serious charge to say that she was trying to get him to use the Clinton campaign line, that it was a matter, not an investigation, and then he did. So is she going to dispute his version of events? And then you have Loretta Lynch and Trump both saying that James Comey is not accurately relaying events. That kind of helps Trump in a way if it comes out that way.
I bet some Democratic strategists will tell her to be quiet. I mean, because, you know, because Comey is sort of, right now, the Democrats' best hope.
Oh, yeah, she's nowhere to be. I wouldn't expect to hear from her for quite a while, maybe after Labor Day or something. Yeah. I guess in our final minute, Claire, what's your sense of how the public is going to digest this? I assume, I don't know what the number is, probably 37% is where it seems to always settle out of Americans. It really, literally wouldn't matter what Trump did or what anybody said about him. They've decided they're with him, and that's going to be the end of it. What about everybody else?
Well, we've been doing some pollings of even Republicans, and a lot of people think that the Russia investigation is overblown, but they didn't like that Jim Comey was fired. So that's one thing. And I think he sort of comported himself pretty well for the public view. I mean, he had a very dramatic written public statement that sort of added sort of the emotional side of the testimony, which is sort of important behind the intent of Trump's directives. But I think under oath, he was a very agile witness. He was, you know, he looks kind of wholesome. He talked about his wife. He sort of, you know, he was truthful almost to a fault in some places. So I think people will probably come away. And by the way, there was no basic dispute of the facts of the case, right? So no one was really calling into question Comey's credibility. So I think probably all in all, people take away a pretty good view of James Comey after this hearing. Okay, we're going to leave it there for now. We'll see what that reaction is. Thank you all so much for coming by tonight. We're going to